Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Well, thank you all so much for making time to come out on this very special day here in Washington County and across our nation. And today is going to be Women in Washington County Day. It's so good to see so many of you here as leaders of our community. I'm especially proud to see so many who are leaders amongst our county organization, many of whom I've hired, many of whom I've welcomed and promoted, many of whom have promoted themselves, many of whom have earned the right to be where you're at in positions across our county today. 100 years ago today, a special thing happened that we should all be very proud about. This nation is going through some difficult times right now, and it's hard to imagine what it was like 100 years ago when different types of difficulties were being gone through. But the fight for suffrage among women was one of those things, and a battle that took quite a long time. But 100 years ago, history was made, and we're here to celebrate it today at our old courthouse. When we talked about doing an event for this, there seemed like no better place than the old courthouse for us to celebrate such a historic moment. So I'd like to take this moment to thank the courthouse staff for allowing us to host this event here today. And I'm going to give a plug really fast to an event that's coming up in September. The Women's Hour has struck Wisconsin's role in the women's suffrage movement. It'll be an event here on Tuesday, September 15th at 6:30 at a cost of $5 per person. I'm sure it'll be a very interesting event, and I encourage you all to attend. We've asked Patty Strakota, former state representative, to come and say a few words. As you'll hear in just a few minutes, Patty is one of the leaders from our county that has made us so proud over the years, including her tenure in the Wisconsin State Assembly and a time on our Washington County Board of Supervisors. So, Patty?
I want to thank you for asking me part of the Women's Suffrage Centennial Celebration for Washington County. It was on August 26, 1920, that the 19th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States was finally ratified. 100 years ago, the 19th Amendment of the United States Constitution stated, the rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on the account of sex. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. This amendment codified in law for the first time that women, like men, deserve all the rights and responsibility of citizenship, and that still holds true today. Whistles and bells rang out in cities all across America acknowledging this historic day. But the campaign for women's suffrage began 100 years before the ratification in 1920. Decades before the Civil War, in the 1820s and 1830s, most states had allowed all white men the right to vote no matter their financial circumstances. It was also at this time, in the 1820s and 30s, that women began to organize, start reform movements, anti-slavery organizations, and question what it meant to be a woman and citizen of the United States. It took 100 years of campaigns, meetings, marches, and education to finally secure the woman's vote. So many women in our nation's history had the courage of their convictions to tenaciously and diligently work for women's rights, especially the women's right to vote. Notables include Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who helped launch the women's rights movement in America. Stanton worked tirelessly for more than 50 years to obtain voting rights for women and also questioned the social and political norms of her day, which excluded women. Susan B. Anthony is probably the best-known suffragette. She was recruited by Elizabeth Stanton to travel and give many forceful speeches, including her famous quote, "Failure is impossible," as well as this excerpt I'm going to read from her best-known speech after her arrest for casting an illegal vote in the presidential election in 1872. And I quote, "It was we, the people, not we, the white male citizen, nor yet we, the male citizen, but we, the whole people, who formed the Union. And we formed it not to give the blessing of liberty, but to secure them, not to be the half of ourselves and the half of our posterity, but to the whole people, women as well as men." And in his downright mockery, to talk to women of their enjoyment of the blessings of liberty while they are denied the use of the only means of securing them, provided by this democratic Republican government, the ballot, end of quote. These were powerful words by a lady who was small in stature, but large in her thinking. Neither Stanton nor Anthony lived long enough to have the opportunity to legally vote in the first national election that was held on November 2nd, 1920. The 8 million women that did vote for the first time were grateful to these women that they could finally fully participate in their government and in their future. The state of Wisconsin also had many female leaders. Whoops, I'm just going to have you hold those. That were suffragettes. I would like to highlight a few of them. Carrie Chapman Catt was born in Ripon, Wisconsin, and was very active at the national level and very instrumental in getting the 19th Amendment passed in the U.S. to the U.S. Constitution. Olympia Brown was from Racine, Wisconsin, and the first woman to be ordained in the U.S. She was also president of the Women's Suffrage Association for 28 years. Belle Lafollette was from Summit, Baraboo, and Madison, Wisconsin. She was the first woman to graduate from law school in the state of Wisconsin. She also served as First Lady and was an outspoken writer and orator for the women's right to vote. The list is long of the women both nationally and in our state that worked tirelessly to secure the women's right to vote. I was inspired by their stories while preparing this presentation and would encourage you to read about their stories also. The depth of gratitude is owed to these women and all the suffragettes who were willing to voice their opinion, sacrifice their time, and dedicate their lives so that women could have the right to vote and participate in forming their government and communities. The women who participated in the suffragette movement were often criticized for their boisterous nature and unladylike conduct, but they persevered. Also, in researching the suffragette movement specific to the state of Wisconsin, I discovered the road to secure the women's right to vote was a bumpy one here. Decades before, different groups of women's rights supporters, starting as early as 1846, even before we were gained statehood, worked on securing married women's property rights in our state. Bills to grant women full suffrage were introduced in our legislature in 1855 and in 1867, but both failed. Other states such as Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, mostly the states out west, had already allowed for full suffrage. In 1911, Wisconsin held a referendum on the question of women's suffrage, and ironically, the men voted it down 67% to 37%. And after this statewide defeat, the Wisconsin suffragettes devoted their time and energy to the national movement and found more support from Wisconsin congressmen who were more sympathetic to the women's movement than members of the state legislature. Even though the path Wisconsin took to securing women the right to vote was a difficult one, Wisconsin's claim to fame is that it was the first state in the Union to ratify the 19th Amendment on June 10, 1919. As soon as the Wisconsin legislature ratified, they sent a special messenger, an ardent supporter of women's suffrage, to carry Wisconsin ratification papers to the State Department in Washington, D.C. Wisconsin was the first state whose ratification of the amendment received official notice in Washington. The story I read was that the Wisconsin Messenger was leaving the Washington, D.C. State Department as the Illinois representative was walking in. Like today, our neighboring state to the south is still one step behind Wisconsin. The women of the United States of America are now voting in larger numbers than the men. Our voices are being heard across the nation, and we are so grateful for those that paved the way. The passion of the suffragettes in securing our right, whoops, I'm going to give you this. There you go. To vote should be no different than our passion in exercising this fundamental human right. We must always vote. Thank you, Jamie, for inviting me today and allowing me to share some history and my thoughts on this special day. Thanks, everyone, for coming. That's what he said. You thought I was going to do that.
I set them up there so I can do it now.
Yeah.
Well, Patty, thank you so much for your words. It's pretty special to be up here to be able to speak with you today and declare today Women in Washington County Day. Aside from my mother, I'm surrounded by some of the most influential women in my life. Of course, my beautiful wife, Jody. My mother on the county board, Chris Dice. The first female second vice chairwoman of the Washington County Board of Supervisors. Patty, of course. Patty Strakota was the first person to endorse me in my race for county executive. And Jamie Ludovic and Julie Driscoll, who are two of the 4 members of my cabinet. And of course, many of the rest of you who I've worked with closely over the last several years. It's just humbling to be here. Over the last several weeks, our nation has struggled mightily with its history. And after hearing Patty's words, I can't help but think, standing at this place 100 years ago, what it must have been like to be a woman in Washington County, to be a woman in Wisconsin. So I'll ask you to just take a moment, which I don't think we're doing enough of in this nation right now, and reflect on what it was like 100 years ago. Women in Washington County Day, August 26, 2020. Whereas on August 26, 1920, United States Secretary of State Bainbridge Colby certified the Constitution's 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote in all elections. And whereas Wisconsin women by the thousands advocated for the right to vote, and male legislative allies on June 10, 1919, made Wisconsin the first state to ratify the amendment proposed by Congress just days prior. And whereas the 2020 presidential election on November 3rd marks 100 years since women were permitted to vote in federal elections. And whereas over half of the entire population of Washington County are women, of which roughly 50,000 are of voting age. And whereas Washington County is represented in county government by 4 women constitutional officers, Register of Deeds Sharon Martin, County Treasurer Jane Merton, Clerk of Circuit Courts Teresa Russell, and County Clerk Ashley Reichert, 7 female county board supervisors, including Second Vice Chair Chris Dice, Marcy Bishop, Lois Krieger-Gundrum, Linda Gurath, Pam Conrath, Kara Guzzi, and Jody Schulteis, and Circuit Court Judge, most recently, Sandra Gernock. And whereas Washington County women have a history of being elected to leadership positions, with Senator Mary Panzer, who was the first woman elected Senate Majority Leader in 2003, Representative Pat Strakota, who was the first woman to be elected Assembly Majority Leader in 2014, and Justice Annette Ziegler, who was elected to the Wisconsin State Supreme Court in 2007. Now therefore, I, Josh Shulman, Washington County Executive, hereby proclaim August 26, 2020 as Women in Washington County Day across Washington County in honor of the 100th anniversary of women voting in all elections, and reaffirm Washington County's commitment to uplifting the voices of women across our county. It is officially Women in Washington County Day in Washington County.